All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Mike here. Thanks for doing this, man.
We live? We doing this?
Yeah, we're live. Let's go. Are you ready?
I'm such a fangirl. I cannot believe I'm on your show. This is amazing. I remember I met you when you were just a little tiny little blogger and podcaster in my house, and you came by, and you're all grown up now, and look at you now.
So Mike knows that the secret to podcast success is just lay the bullshit on real early. All right. So for like the three people who are listening,
the ego.
for the three people who are listening who don't know who you are, give us a quick rundown of what you did before getting into crypto and running Arrington Capital.
Okay. I thought you were going to say for the three people watching this podcast, and I was like, wow, I think you have a few more than that. How many people on average watch your podcast through all the different ways?
In April's, the last numbers I remember, 2.5 million people, 2.6 million people. Total views and downloads. No. Total for the month. So it varies. Like the episode I did with Chamath got 1 million views just on YouTube alone.
He knows how to do a fucking soundbite. Are we allowed to swear? Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
He knows how to do a soundbite, doesn't he? So
of course.
Rich, man.
It's when you tell the truth, people pay attention, right?
They do, as long as you say it with the right way, and he has that down to a science. So yeah, he was a marketer originally. So anyway, so me, what do I do? I mean, I'm known for TechCrunch, which I started in 2005 and sold in 2010. So I've been away from TechCrunch for longer than I was there. But luckily, the people that took over have kept it going strong. And so it's still a known brand, and that's great for me. And I go to the conferences and all that. Before that, I was an entrepreneur, and I started off as a lawyer, and then I started companies. And the first company failed. The second company was a mild success. It's actually a fascinating story about venture capital, which I'd be happy to talk about. And it was in the payment space. And then and I started like company after company after company that either failed or were mild successes. And then I started TechCrunch in 2005 because I was living on the beach in Manhattan Beach. I was between jobs, and I'm like, I need to like start researching more because I was sort of out of the loop. And I realized there was no website that like just talked about startups. You know, it was like there were tech sites like CNET that talked about startups with a lot of other stuff, but nobody was focused just on startups. And I thought this group of people needs a place to call home. And there was no real social media back then or anything like that. And so I just started TechCrunch as a lark, as a hobby. And it took off. It was like the one startup I didn't intentionally start as a startup. And it was the company that first made me some money. And so, and that's it. After that, I became a venture capitalist and I switched into crypto.
And so when you started TechCrunch, it was just you writing, and it was basically like almost like a beefed up blog, really, right? And then it kind of grew from there into what we know it today.
Yeah, you can actually go back and find the first posts. They were terrible. And it was me sitting in my bathing suit on the beach in Manhattan Beach. I surfed every day. My life consisted of getting up, surfing, playing video games for like 6 hours or more. Girlfriend would come home, yell at me for being a total slob. And then I would, start writing. And that was it. And so I did that for a few months, and then it took off, like I said, so I was able to start getting other writers, started getting some revenue. We had some innovative ways of making money back then. And at the end, it was like 40-something people. We were in a house in Atherton, which is in the middle of Silicon Valley, and a crappy rental house in the richest zip code in America. It was a tear-down house, and we had interns in our backyard on IKEA desks. The first thing you had to do as an intern was build your own IKEA desk. And then they were in the backyard with extension cords running out on their laptops, and like they're trying to shade the sun and look at their laptops and get work done. And finally the city came and shut us down. And after that, we became more corporate. We got an office and started doing things normally. But the best thing I did with TechCrunch is I never took venture capital.
Why?
Like all of my competitors, the ones that did well and didn't do well, they all took venture capital. And so even the ones that sold for a lot of money, the founders made nothing or next to nothing. Because I had learned, I remember I told you I had this first startup. It was called HX. It was a payment startup. And we sold it to First Data Corporation 12 months after we founded it for like $32 or $33 million. And you think, wow, There were a couple founders and me, and we thought we'd make money, right? We didn't, and here's why. We raised 18 million in venture capital from Draper Fisher Jurvetson. Back then, 2x liquidation preferences were considered normal. Now it's 1x. And so that meant that the VCs got 2 times their money back before anyone else took any money. And 2 times 18 is more than the purchase price. So to not block it, they had to pay us off, and I basically had enough money to buy a nice car, and that was it. And I learned being an entrepreneur is great, but being a VC is much better if you want to actually make money. So I didn't take money at TechCrunch.
When you didn't take the money, how did that change the way you built the company?
We had to run it from revenue. And so, one of the things about venture capital is you can raise all this money and you don't actually have to know if your product fits. The idea is you're spending money to build a product and then hoping people will come. If you don't have that luxury or decide not to take it, you have to find other ways to fund that business. And traditionally, that's through cash flow. And so we were constantly finding new ways to make money through ads at first, and then eventually through conferences.
Yeah. And I believe I've heard stories of literally founders trying to show up to the office to get stories. Was that true? Or?
Yeah. By the way, just to go back to that, one of the really innovative ways we came up with making money is we had a webcam in the office. It was on all the time, or at least I think it was on 24/7. We had a whiteboard, and Heather, our CEO, who's my partner now still, would write the name of a startup on the whiteboard and put the whiteboard in front of the camera. And she charged thousands of dollars for that for a day. And we did that for months and made lots of money. It helped us get through a rough period, I think in 2008 or whatever. But anyway, yeah, people would come. It was sort of a rite of passage to come and show up to TechCrunch, and it was fine. Sometimes it got weird. Some Dutch guys, the founders of the Next Web, which is now a pretty well-known website, and nice enough guys, but they had a startup and they decided they had to get into TechCrunch, and so they broke into my house while I was sleeping, and they came and opened my bedroom door, and they had a video camera, and they filmed me, and they had a Starbucks. They got me a Starbucks, and they filmed me in bed waking up, and boy was I pissed. I was very pissed. And I remember Wired magazine wrote an article about it as if it was the most hilarious thing in the world. It was just, I was thinking they committed a crime, right? But it was so I had no privacy, and so sometimes I had to leave the TechCrunch house and go other places just so I could get away from it all.
Yeah, that's absolutely nuts. If you were to start TechCrunch today and really go hard into media as an entrepreneur, what would you do differently, or how do you kind of see the difference?
Well, I know the answer. I'm trying to think of an interesting way of saying it. So again, when I started TechCrunch, there was no place for startups. They weren't very newsworthy. Particularly very young startups got no news whatsoever until they raised money at least. And as TechCrunch grew, we still covered startups, but we found that big store, I broke the YouTube getting acquired by Google. I broke it before anyone else, and I had the price. That actually put TechCrunch on the map. And then, we started doing Google stories and Facebook stories, and big company stories got a lot more traffic. And so you start to gravitate towards the big news. And that's also why CNET and others did that. And so today, TechCrunch is largely big company news. Sometimes it's regurgitating press releases and a lot of social justice stuff, some of which is awesome and some of which is just terrible. And so I actually think the original idea for TechCrunch is still needed. And you've seen different companies and products come into existence over the years to deal with this. Product Hunt was one, if you remember Product Hunt, which is still going. So I actually think the original thesis is actually still a good one. And I think if somebody wanted to do that, I think there would be an audience, because there's an ecosystem of young founders who need press, and they have interesting stories to tell. I would never do it again. It was just too difficult. It was too much work for not enough money ultimately. But I think in crypto, which is the industry I'm in now, we desperately need this. The crypto news ecosystem is not healthy, and I think that somebody, if they wanted to, could do this, but not me. So.
Do you think that it's still a written thing where it's kind of websites, mobile optimized or whatever, or do you think that there's video, audio, whatever other mediums make more sense?
I think video makes a lot of sense. I think video is hard, as you know. you can talk forever, but it's not necessarily interesting. You need to edit it. You need to produce it. You need to have studio. It's just a lot of work. And some people don't want to consume content that way because it creates externalities around you. You've got noise and stuff like that. I like reading a good article. So I think text is always going to be very important. I think obviously videos and audio is hugely important as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then when you started,
but as you've seen, you can build you can build an empire with, just doing what you're doing. In your, is it your kitchen? Where are you?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm in my kitchen right now. We used to have an office, and we basically just took one room and did it there. But I mean, look,
there's no one way to do it, right? It's just you have to find interesting content and really love what you do, and I think you'll be successful then.
I also think the whole idea of venture capital, there's a lot of venture capitalists who are still confused that a pure play media company is going to be, $1 billion company. And I think what we're learning now, just like you figured out, hey, look, the conferences, the webcam, like these other revenue sources can be highly profitable for what they are. Now we're going to get into this world where like the media companies figure out other ways to monetize than just like, hey, pay me some advertising and I'll slap a banner ad somewhere or whatever. And what I haven't seen yet that I think BuzzFeed maybe tried to do this is I'm shocked no one's built a media company and then went and built products and then used their distribution to pipe the products through. I think BuzzFeed tried it, but I don't know how successful it was.
I'll tell you one thing. Ultimately, I don't care, right? I mean, I don't think a lot about how to build the next media empire. And I think that's why I was successful. I truly loved like what I did. Like the very first few years, I didn't think about the business. Heather did. I mean, I talked about the business a little bit. That was all my CEO. So I hired a CEO because I'm terrible at managing people. She ran the business. She turned it into what it was. I was just, I don't want to say I'm the talent. It sounds like I'm boasting, but I was literally just a guy who, I have a very important call coming. I was literally just a guy who wrote content every day. And I loved meeting founders. I loved meeting understanding what their new products were. And that's just what I love doing. And I think obviously you love what you're doing, right? I mean, you like talking to people.
So you obviously spent a bunch of time interviewing founders, hundreds if not thousands of them. How'd that help you when you got to the investing side of the table?
A lot of people owed me favors, right? I mean, for an entrepreneur, that first press is very important. It can help you hire. It's your parents get to see it, your friends get to see it. Like it feels good. It feels more real. And I was often, if not usually, the first person to write about a startup. And so that generates a lot of camaraderie and goodwill. And so that definitely helped when we launched our venture fund, get into some of the early, like really important deals that really helped our first venture fund, like hit it out of the park. And so, it's also just doing goodwill, like doing nice things for people without any kind of transactional hope for a payoff is actually like really works out well in the end, right? You just do what you love, you help people, and you're going to find a way to be successful from that. And if it's not a transactional, like some people are so obviously transactional in the way they deal with people that you know what I mean by that. You just sort of end up being turned off by it all. Just help people like in a way that is fun to do, and it'll all end up working out well.
Yeah, it's funny too because I think Silicon Valley, like literally the physical place, more so than probably anywhere else in the business world, understands that. And I think it's like Naval talks about, playing long-term games, long-term people, or whatever the quote is. And it just feels like Silicon Valley has known this for decades, and people know that they're going to run into each other again. And so people generally try to use that to their advantage.
So let's just explore that for a minute, because I think it's really important. So I realized once I got into crypto that is not how the whole world works. So in Silicon Valley, we dealt with a lot of New York people, and New York people have their own special way of dealing with people in business, and not necessarily negative. You just had to be abrupt, direct, right? And you have to adjust to that. And New York people adjust to Silicon Valley people. But generally speaking, like people find a way in Silicon Valley to work out their problems without like it getting ugly. I don't know if you know, Benchmark sued Uber a few years ago. That was like a sea change in Silicon Valley. Like you just didn't see that. I mean, you saw it very rarely with egregious examples of malfeasance, but like what Uber did, like it was interesting that Benchmark sued them because that reputational issue is important to them. When I got into crypto, I realized very suddenly that like a lot of players were not in Silicon Valley or New York. They were in Europe and they were in Asia, and like completely different like cultures, right? And for anybody who spends a lot of time in Asia, you realize how different the cultures in Asia are. But like when you deal with people from China, Chinese nationals, you have to like worry about things in a certain way. When you deal with people from Singapore who are maybe Chinese, it's totally different. Hong Kong, again, totally different. And Korea, totally different. And so I had to learn very quickly that people do business differently, and you have to watch yourself because long-term reputations didn't matter as much, especially in like 18 when we first started getting involved in this in 2017. And it's really a problem in crypto because I think a lot of people have almost like a Napoleon complex. I don't know how to put it, but like crypto was so hot in 2017 and it's become so mundane since then. And people like you and I believe it will become very, very hot again. But in the meantime, I think people with these very large egos aren't making any money and they act in a certain way that's just been disappointing to me.
Yeah. And I think also you see this in finance, right, et cetera. It's just like it's a very binary game, kind of zero sum. I win, you.
Yeah.
And I think also venture investing in general, like people who understand how it works, realize it doesn't have to be zero sum, right? Yes, maybe you lose a deal.
No, it's not zero sum.
Yeah.
It's not zero sum. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that like just the asset and the way that the investing is done definitely helps. But on top of that, also, if you think of Silicon Valley, like there is a scarcity of great companies, right? And so everyone is going to, when they see great companies at whatever stack of the process, they're going to.
I would not say. I'd say there's a surplus of capital.
Okay, yeah. So either way, it's either surplus of capital or scarcity of companies. But there's a mismatch between the capital available and the number of companies that should probably get that capital.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And that's probably not necessarily as true in the finance world. Maybe there's individual deals, but there's definitely a very different mindset without a doubt.
Well, and the funny thing is you eventually gravitate to people you like doing business with. So you, for example, by the way, who's our sponsor today? Is it BlockFi? Is it Kingdom Trust? Both amazing companies. Yeah.
Mike is obviously an expert at all things media and revenue.
But BlockFi, a great company, you're an investor in, and you've been like from the beginning, right?
Pretty early, yeah.
Yeah. Your fund has put like a big bet on BlockFi over multiple rounds, and you introduced them to me, and we invested because of you. And it wasn't you, for example, trying to resell your shares to me at triple the price that you bought them, which is a situation I recently came across with some Asian investors with a different company that I won't mention called Deribit. And it was just a wonderful, and I assume you didn't get a kickback from BlockFi as part of that, which another company we just looked at, it turned out somebody else was getting, the person introduced to us was getting a kickback. Like all that stuff is just very alien and ugly to me. You simply liked the company. You thought I could add value. You thought it would be a good investment for us. You put us together. We made the investment and we love the company. And as far as I know, you got nothing out of that, I hope, except BlockFi was, again, even more appreciative to you. And I've never heard a company gush over someone the way they gushed over you when we first talked to them. So,
well, they're incredibly kind, but I think that your point about it's this weird thing where you're lining up incentives, right? Like I knew that we were super bullish on the company. We were literally making a very big investment. I knew that they were looking specifically for certain types of help that we said, look, we can help in one area, but there's other people who are much better than we are. Let's go get those people. You happen to be one of those people who brought very specific value to what they needed. And when you line that up, I think the point around, one, you get to see a deal you didn't previously see or didn't spend much time on, right? And you like it, so you're going to go do the deal. They look in, they say, hey, look, we've got this great investor being added to our cap table. And for us, it's one of these things where like, if you're not involved in the deal, like I would argue that the deal's upside potential is not as high as it is with you in the deal, right? So like you almost want, you want people around the table who you know can help because those people will make everyone make more money.
And also not fair weather friends because too many people are fair weather friends. And you see this in crypto as well, where like when everything's hot, everybody's your best friend. But companies, they really need their investors when times are bad. And if you stick through a company when times are bad, they remember that, and they tell other people. And I'm not saying, as far as I know, BlockFi hasn't had a bad time yet, but when they do, you'll be there for them, and I'll be there for them, and they'll remember that. So
Couldn't agree more. Speaking of crypto stuff, like I know that you have, I think you still have it pinned to the top of your Twitter account, buying Bitcoin in 2014, which was not necessarily a popular thing to do. Remember the first time you ever came across Bitcoin, or kind of what drove you to buy Bitcoin?
when was the first time you bought Bitcoin?
I think in early 16. I heard about it in 14 when I Facebook, and I did nothing. I didn't even Google it. And then I think the first time I bought it was either end of 15 or beginning of 16.
So I had heard about it earlier, and obviously should have bought. In Silicon Valley, it was just known, right? It was known what it was, but no one really had gotten their arms around it or treated it very seriously. I say no one. Some people had, but not me. Coinbase, I think Coinbase was launched around then. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it was like 13 or 14.
And it obviously Silicon Valley startup, and so I think people started to understand it more. And I'm pretty sure the first crypto I bought was on Coinbase, so I started an account. And so it wasn't like and it was more just like, hey, let's see what this is, right? Then, hey, I'm going to go all in. So I bought some, and then I forgot about it. And I mean, I literally probably didn't log into Coinbase for years, except I had set up like an auto buy or something. I forgot what it was. Anyway, when I finally logged in 17, I was looking at it again. I was like, holy shit! This is some incredible amount of money, right? Compared to what I first put in. And so that was fun. And I did that with a couple, I bought Monero. I was doing dark web research, and I forgot why. It wasn't to buy guns or have someone killed, but I bought Monero to buy something on the dark web. And I never bought anything. And the Monero, I bought, I don't know, it was like a few $100s of Monero. And at some point I looked in 2017, it was like $150,000 of Monero I had in a wallet. But the only trace of it I had was a printed out key. So, that ended up in our fund too. But yeah, it was more just serendipity than anything else. So.
Yeah. And I guess at what point did you realize hey, this isn't just buy a couple of tokens and I came back a couple of years later and it's this huge thing, and more so there is a legitimate investment thesis that we can go build a fund around and deploy capital in kind of a sustainable, repeatable process?
You want the truth, or you want the really awesome answer that make me look smart? So
no, I want the truth.
The truth is, I went on a date with a person who is currently my fiance. And she had a startup that was heavy into crypto. And this is in early 2017. And she was planning an ICO, and she's talking about these ICOs, and I had heard of them, but I wasn't fully aware of exactly what was going on. And I'm like, it sounds like a pyramid scheme to me. And she's like, no, there's actual companies being built. And so I invested in a couple of ICOs after that. And as you know, in 2017, you couldn't, it would be hard to not make money on ICOs in 2017. So I quickly made a lot of money on those ICOs, and I said, ooh, I think I want to do this more full time. So I had a discussion with my partner at the venture fund, and he was less interested in crypto. So I decided at that point to break away from the venture fund, let him continue to run that, and I would focus entirely on crypto. And then I knew the person I knew in crypto who had the most interesting things going on was Brad Garlinghouse at Ripple. And so we had discussions about how I could create a fund, a hedge fund, and he basically made it happen. Ripple didn't invest; they couldn't for tax reasons mostly, but he helped make it happen, and I'll be eternally grateful to him for that. So it's really because of a girl, I guess, is when I got really into crypto. So
I love it. And so when you go and talk to Brad, he's the CEO of Ripple at the time.
Yeah, one of your guests. You strategically put a box of toilet paper behind his head when you had him on your podcast. Are you going to Photoshop something in?
We talked about this already. God damn it, Mike.
But off air. I just wanted to make sure on air.
You're fine.
Because if you're a real fan, if you're a super fan of Pomp, that was one of the really cool moments, was when you strategically, purposely placed toilet paper behind the CEO of Ripple's head on your podcast. It was brilliant marketing. It was absolutely spectacular.
All I will say is that is not true, and we'll leave it at that. But you got it on air. Good job. No, so when you go talk to him, and you specifically said hedge fund, but you guys
Yeah.
do trading and you also do venture-like investments, or is it all more
Yeah.
liquid trading?
So we're a hedge fund, and that's a structure. And the difference between a hedge fund and a venture fund is a venture fund gets a pile of money and then spends it over 4 or 5 years, right? I think you guys are a venture fund, right?
We are.
And then you raise new funds every few years. Um, a hedge fund takes a pile of money, and by the way, when you with a venture fund, when you have wins, you then give the money back to investors. You don't reinvest it. With a hedge fund, you get a pile of money and you invest it over and over and over again until investors say, "Hey, I'd like to get my money back or part of it back." So it's more of a perpetual thing, and you get paid out every year. That's a great thing in a bear market. Like I learned from a venture fund, you start a venture fund in 7 to 10 years, you get back a lot of money. With a hedge fund, every year you get back a lot of money unless you start a hedge fund the first week of 2018 and you're basically buying Bitcoin at, not 20,000, but I think 14,000, and you're buying, ETH at 1,000, you're going to see some losses that year. And with a hedge fund, the problem with losses is it's very hard to recover from them. So we lost 42% of our fund in 2018. But the market was down 90% in 2018. So we did okay. Like we fought the market the whole way and we eked out enough gains, mostly in deals we did, to do much better than the market. Even that, you have to make that 42% back before you can ever take profits. And the market still hasn't totally recovered from the highs of 2018. So all the hedge funds that started that year are in deep trouble. Some of them have gone under. Some of them actually have gone under, but they haven't officially. We were lucky enough that we had done better than the market, so that we raised. So our original fund was like 100 million. We raised another $30 million in December of 2018 from our LPs, and because they trusted us, they liked us, and we had done well compared to the market. And these are XRP holders, so we had done spectacularly well against XRP. So they loved us and still love us, I hope. That money in 2018, we then bought Bitcoin at like 3,500. I mean, we had to buy something with it. We got a bunch of XRP as a contribution. We bought Bitcoin, and then we just sat on that. So that ended up working out really well. So we had like a spectacular year last year, but we were very, very lucky because if we didn't have LPs that supported us, we would be, I don't think we'd be dead, but we wouldn't be making any money. So
yeah, and at the I think like end of Q3, beginning of Q4, I wrote a couple of times about this whole idea of like the high watermark in the hedge fund world, and
yeah,
I've actually been surprised how many hedge funds have survived. Right, so you basically explained like
yeah,
there's two things you can do: either you can trade your way out of it, right, and that's really really
yeah,
difficult to do, especially when it's double digit losses, or two, you can raise new capital. And so I think that the raising new capital that isn't subject to that high
very hard.
watermark,
Yeah.
yeah, but more people have done it
Well,
than I
that's
would have.
right. That new capital has its own high watermark. So it's not, it doesn't go, yeah, it's fact, every time you raise new capital, it's like you're raising a new mini fund. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think I was just surprised in a positive way how many people were either able to raise new capital or trade their way out of it, which I think is
Yeah.
overall net positive for the industry. But there was a point there in 2018 where people were down. I mean, I saw LP statements that people were down, more than the market, right? They're down literally 99%, 98%.
Well, yeah, which is kind of the most you can lose, right? Like you can't lose 101% of your fund. And so being down 99% is, I mean, it's almost epic. Like it's like, if you're going to do it right.
Yeah, because you basically, what is it? You have to 100x your fund to get back to the high watermark.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you turn you turn, what is it? $1 million into $10,000. Is that right? And if you've lost 99% of the fund, well, 100,000 turns into 1,000. That's math we can do. And then
Yeah,
you basically
you get
have to
100x.
99. Yeah.
Yeah, 90x.
Yeah. Which is difficult. So yeah,
Even in crypto, that's hard to do.
it's, it's hard to do. Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously, a big piece of the crypto industry is crypto regulation. I think it was back in 2018. There was a moment where I saw you fire off a tweet, and I said, "Look, I don't know Mike super super well at the time, but I said I know he's mad because you basically were like, look, like I can't invest in the U.S. if everything's
Oh,
just
I'm so
shut down."
I'm so pissed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I could just tell. I knew that there was that tweet
Yeah.
came with like smoke coming out of your ears as you sent it. And now we're seeing conversations about Jay Clayton potentially not being SEC commissioner for longer. He's going to get a kind of promotion to go be the U.S. District Attorney for the Southern District of New York potentially.
Is that a promotion? Is it a promotion? I don't know.
The articles I read positioned it as a promotion, but that's a
Yeah.
good point. Like maybe that's just corporate,
I don't know. Yeah,
bullshit
I don't know.
speak.
Yeah.
But kind of how do you look at the regulatory front today where ICOs seem to kind of have dissipated in the US? Maybe we're seeing it more internationally, but just how do you look at the regulatory front?
Well, I think the U.S. Look, I'm older, right? I remember the internet, and the internet was invented by America and spread first in America, and nobody messed around with it legally, and it grew like crazy, and now it drives the whole economy. These companies that were created in the 90s, right? Google, Amazon, etc. Um, Crypto's different. Like crypto, I'm not exactly sure where crypto was invented. It doesn't matter. Like nobody knows, but wherever that was, it was invented on the internet. And the U.S. has done like sometimes it ignores it and sometimes it throws up roadblocks. But what it really needs to do is just get out of the way, and like it did with the internet, and it absolutely hasn't. And so you know, there's so much innovation that wants to come in crypto in the U.S. and so many of these entrepreneurs leave the U.S. or don't move here from wherever they live. And it's just I feel bad for the U.S. right? I feel bad because I'm an American. I want our country to succeed, and I believe crypto is the future. I believe Bitcoin is money, and money is Bitcoin. Period. And why would we not want to? I know why we don't want to like be in the forefront of this. It threatens the dollar. It's confusing, and the SEC, is always trying to protect people from schemes. But we need to let innovation blossom, and we don't want that just to happen in China and Singapore and et cetera, because ultimately it's bad for the U.S. So yeah, I was mad. I'm still mad, and I think that we need to get somebody in there that, at the very least, provides regulations that are understandable so we can work through them, as opposed to this great fucking unknown, which means nobody does anything in crypto in the U.S. anymore, and that worries me. So.
Yeah, and it feels like the proposed solution from what most people all consider have common sense. Just say, hey, look, tell us what the rules are. Or like you're saying, it's the problem right now is
Yeah.
almost like the rules are being written retroactively through enforcement, and not instead saying, hey,
Yeah.
here's the rules. If entrepreneurs know the rules, they'll go play by the rules. And for the good
Yeah.
actors, it's just like, oh, I did this thing. Now you're going to come after me but I also have like a letter from a lawyer that says that this was legal, and you just get in this weird
Doesn't
world.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can hire Skadden Arps and like try to work it all out in Telegram's case, and it doesn't work out. I don't know. Like if you like, I have somebody who does my taxes for me, and he does a lot of tech people's taxes. And the crypto stuff is like he's very very good at what he does, but he was making educated guesses on how I should pay taxes on my own crypto gains over the years. And like, what's up with that? Like there's not even clarity at that level. And so yeah, I mean, I hope at some point soon we get our act together. And recent news suggests we might have a hope of that. So.
Going outside the U.S., where else have you guys spent a lot of time? I know you guys in Asia, but are there specific cities or
Yeah.
countries that are interesting?
Yeah, I mean, Singapore is like the meeting place in Asia. It's sort of the Silicon Valley of crypto in Asia, and so Singapore is the easy place to go because everybody likes going to Singapore. It's for those of you who haven't been, it's somewhere you definitely want to go. At least once. As an American, I value freedom, personal freedom. Singapore doesn't have that, and so I was expecting a kind of a Disneyland-esque police state, and that is kind of what it is. But it's pretty pleasant. Like if you just want a nice place to live that's safe, it's a great place to be. And it's interesting as an American to have some of my views challenged by just visiting, seeing how great it is. But Singapore is a place where a lot of people meet. We spent a lot of time in Japan and Hong Kong, Korea, and China as well. And those different places, countries, or cities become more interesting at different times. But Singapore is definitely sort of the place to go if you want to have a taste of crypto in Asia. Yeah.
Do you see like different types of companies or projects in Asia versus the United States, or do you think that kind of all of the variations you get are being built in both geographies?
I think if you ask most crypto investors what they really think, they will tell you that most of the real science being done in crypto is in the US with caveats. There is stuff in Israel that's being done that's amazing. And there is actual science being done in Asia. But the US, I think, is still the leader in terms of where the actual work is being done. But a lot of these companies aren't based in the US. They have employees here, for example. So.
Yeah. And is that a function of the capital mostly being in the US? Or do you think that that's just literally like Silicon Valley has this institutional knowledge, they've got the muscle memory, and so people want to build companies in the US because there's where they've seen the most successful company come from?
I don't know. I'm not sure I could give an answer to that. I mean, I could imagine all kinds of prejudices as well coming into like subconsciously. I don't know why. And there's definitely good stuff being done around the world. And it just might be that we have a big tech infrastructure here for people to spring from, but China does as well. And it's just a little different there for people. So.
Yeah. And so going outside of crypto, obviously the political landscape is just pure chaos at the moment. We've got an autonomous zone in like 6 or 7 blocks of Seattle, which I think you're actually from Seattle, right? Or from Washington?
I'm near Seattle now. Yeah, that's fun.
Okay. And then we've got my favorite thing you've tweeted a while is please don't take the presidential debates from us because they would be
Oh
fun to
God,
watch.
you used to be a Marine, right?
Army, yeah.
Did you? Oh, so like Marines are. No, I won't get into that. But like, does the Army guy in you just want to like break up Chaz or Chop and like just create order from chaos, or like how do you view that? Do you laugh at it?
This is going to sound crazy, but I am a big believer in life that people self-select into the communities they want to live. And so if people literally want to go live in a place where there's no police, they do, self-policing or whatever, and whatever kind of autonomous zone they have
police.
Yeah,
there was a video of people being maced. Like it's literally like they're using the effectively tear gassing. Yeah,
it's the mafia. It's literally what happens when you
have organized mafia. But
when you have a power vacuum, what happens? Like I think they were calling the one guy the warlord, but like the mafia. This different names for people, but like somebody takes over and is in control.
Yeah.
So like I'm actually of the belief like let people do whatever they want. Maybe don't do it in the downtown Seattle. Like that seems kind of ridiculous. Where that's like kind of taxpayers have paid for it, whatever. But if people want to go do that stuff, like I'm sure there's other weird places in America that aren't on the front page of every news.
No, you can do that. Well, look, I mean, the only problem I have with it really is that people who own or live there who didn't elect to become part of it were just subsumed into it. That's a problem. Yep. Otherwise, I just found it kind of entertaining, right? I mean, it's the
best marketing campaign someone could run for having police. Right. Like that's the way I think about it is like, yeah, I get the whole, like people want to defund the police, but the argument that I've heard actually to me that seems more compelling and people freak out when they hear this without the explanation, but it's like, no, actually they should get more funding. And you should require, rather than like 6 weeks of training to become a police officer, like make them train for 2 years, treat it like the Navy SEALs. You literally have to be the top 1% of 1% to get through this program. And then you get to, you have the pleasure of serving as a Navy SEAL. Well, same thing with the police.
Yeah.
And also take that additional, year and a half or more of training and don't just teach them how to shoot guns. Like teach them how to do social worker stuff or, all these other things that it's bad because like the police are killing people. That is a problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to ask ourselves like, how much of it is like police officers are bad people and how much of it is like we've put them in a bad position in terms of the way that we train them? I actually
or does
think
the
that
environment turn them into like you've actually been in combat too, right?
Yep.
I mean, my knowledge of combat is based on video games and movies, so I have no idea. But like being in an environment can change you after a while, right?
For sure.
And I mean, and so being a police, like I remember, to take it away from the police, I remember reading some like article written by a fireman in San Francisco a couple years ago, and his job was basically to basically try to resuscitate drug addicts who'd overdosed. Right? I mean, that's it. They weren't putting out any fires. All night was spent trying to revive these people who were dying on the streets. And his main goal was to not to wear enough protective gear that he wouldn't get accidentally stabbed with a needle, right? And obvious problems around that. But how desensitized you get to human suffering when you're doing that. And so I assume police, get desensitized to certain things after a while. And that's why in their mind, planting drugs, which you've seen more and more videos of that, is a perfectly reasonable thing to do because they know that person's deep down is a bad person. So they're helping society by doing it. And I don't know if more training helps that or not. I have no idea what helps that. So
Yeah, and I think also part of it is in many cases the police will explain away the behavior in their head, whether they're right or wrong.
sure, yeah,
Part of what I think I said this to somebody recently, and I think they were a little taken back that like this is the mentality. But like, for example, a lot of military members across all of the branches of the military, when they're at war, there's a saying that literally says, "I would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6." Which
sure, yeah,
essentially is, hey, look, I'm not going to die, because then basically that is the judge and executioner, right?
yeah,
I think the same thing, some of that mentality is pervasive in the police. But what we have to remember is like, I don't care what somebody does. Like, you as a police officer can't be the judge and executioner. Like, if you kill somebody, that is a finite thing. They don't ever get their like day in court. And when you lose that part of the social fabric, or like the social contract of like innocent until proven guilty, and kind of all of those things that I think Americans kind of hang our hats on.
no
Uh,
one's well, no one reasonable is going to disagree with anything you're saying, and I think most of America feels that way. Like, we can actually think police are sometimes way too brutal, and we can also think that a lot of this protesting and looting is absolutely ridiculous and has lost the plot. Right? You can think two things at once. Like, you want to fix a problem, but you don't want to tear down Western civilization to solve that problem. And I don't know. I don't know how to fix it,
yeah, it's look,
but
there's
I
people.
agree with everything you're saying.
There's people way smarter than you and I who hopefully will come up with the solutions. But I think that people are starting to understand
I'm not
it's
sure. Like,
screwed
I
up.
think part of the country wants a perpetual revolution. Like, they profit from it, and they don't want anything fixed. And look, I'm a libertarian. I'm not. I think Republicans and Democrats are almost equally like ridiculous. But these cities have been under Democrat control for decades. If they wanted something changed, they could have changed it at any time, including now. And yet, you don't see a lot of actual change. So I'm not sure they want. I think they, being some in the political class, want this to be perpetual. And on the other side, I think Chaz was probably like one of the greatest political assets for Trump that he had. I mean, the longer that went on, the more ridiculousness around it, the better for him, which is
Yeah.
why I think you're seeing it just being disbanded now, is my understanding. But I'm not sure our politicians want to fix anything in this country. I think they're all like getting their piece. I think they're all peeing in the flower bed. And at some point, the flowers die. And I'm not sure anybody's trying to save the flowers anymore.
Do you, do you think that I'll call it the Silicon Valley ticket? Who the people are probably don't matter nearly as much, but run through your favorite, kind of best known, most memorable people in Silicon Valley. If they got together and said, "Hey, look, we're going to put not only a presidential candidate forward, but literally an entire government. So we're going to pick president, vice president,
Mhm.
all the way down a cabinet. Like, here is who you are going to vote all on one single ticket." And you know that going into it. And these are people who are entrepreneurs. They've solved problems. They know how to allocate capital, blah, 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 all the way down the line. Do you think that that has receptivity in kind of the non-tech world in America?
I think it's a pointless question. I voted for Obama, and I believe Obama was going to bring this country together, and it did not. He did not bring this country together. And some people think he tried. I think evidence shows that he gave up on that. I think I didn't vote for Trump, but I think a lot of people who did thought that he was going to be a certain way, and he hasn't been. Like, he just hasn't been. Even the things he promised, he hasn't been able to get done. I'm not sure any politician can survive the political machine. So I think we need to rethink the whole way politics works in America. The power of the federal government is immense and unimaginable by our founders cannot imagine the power of the federal government, the power of even the court system and the activism of the courts. Like, we shouldn't care who the president is, right? And I'm not sure that like we should be hoping the Supreme Court is going to solve every problem that Congress can't get their act together and work out. And so I don't know how to solve it with a group of different people being in power. I'm just not sure that there are perfect people in this, and that's why you know
Do you
I'm starting to
offload?
think about getting a place out of the U.S. Like, it sounds dramatic, but like I own a house outside of the U.S. and I have plans to go there if things get bad enough
Yeah.
here. I
Do you
hope it
feel
doesn't.
like the response to the pandemic was whether actually happened, or the perception of like, hey, the federal government's going to turn to the states and the state governments, you solve this problem. And we kind of saw a lot of the state governments get exposed for having just as poor leadership and effectiveness as the federal government.
Well, look, I think in February, it was pretty obvious we should have like told people to wear masks. And instead the government was telling people the opposite, right? I mean, masks seem to be not the silver bullet, but darn close. If everybody wears masks, I think you really crushed the spread of the virus. And literally we lied to the American people and told them they were ineffective simply because we didn't want people to rush out and get all the masks. And it turns out that like any mask, a bandana actually provides you more protection than you could have imagined. And so, no, I don't think we handled it properly. And I think now it's just politics. People on the right don't want to wear masks. Like, why? And people on the left, like, it's just, so no. And I don't think the federal government is really set up to handle these kinds of problems. I think, they talk about the police don't prevent crime. I mean, they prevent crime by their existence, but they come in afterwards and clean up the mess, right? And so, people who are Second Amendment advocates like myself say, you need to protect yourself, because when seconds count, the police are minutes away. And the federal government also isn't good at preventing this kind of stuff. Like, they're good at it. Like, the federal government's good at big monolithic responses to things after they've happened to try to stop it. But they're not good at like this upcoming problem and how do you deal with it. Part of the problem is it's just a big organization, right? It's hard to get pieces moving, turning a battleship. The other problem is if you do nothing, you're probably better off politically than if you do something and it's wrong. And so I'm just not sure there's a solution other than maybe don't lie to us. So
yeah, and the Second Amendment thing, I think what blew me away was just gun sales went through the roof. Right? I mean, I've got a buddy.
All of my liberal friends have asked, have they done with you? There are people, who support every leftist cause imaginable who have privately asked me for gun advice, at least 5 of them. And I've helped them get the right weapons. And I've also told them, like, if you can't find a way to take a class and use it safely, like, you're probably worse off, right? Because they're so frightened of these things that they're probably going to end up hurting themselves or not knowing what to do with them. But yeah, no, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I think that's dead on. My buddy literally said that he went to the gun store and the line was legitimately out the door. And he said,
and I love seeing minorities and women do it too. I love seeing minorities, like, because a lot of the original gun laws in the last century were put in place to stop blacks from getting guns. I mean, that's my understanding, right? And so I think minorities being well armed is wonderful as long as they're responsible gun owners. So
where would you go outside the U.S. if it came to that?
Where would you go?
So I would say there's probably 3 places off the top of my head. One is Bulgaria, just given the fact that
we've both spent a lot of time in Bulgaria. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, both my fiance and Mike's fiance are Polina's Bulgarian. Natalie is Bulgarian.
She's Russian, but she spent 20 years or like 15 years there. Yeah.
Yeah, lived there for a long time. So that's one. Singapore would be another one that would be just again.
Have you been to Singapore?
I've been 2 or 3 times now. I think
you can't bring your guns. You can't bring your weapons there.
Yeah, I haven't looked at Singapore in any kind of real material way. Or the third place I would go is Italy.
See, I see you more in Mexico, like central Mexico, setting up there like an autonomous zone of your own. I really do. I think that you,
Mike, that's what we call a cartel. I do not want to run a cartel.
I didn't want to use that word, but I think, you could do well.
I mean, look, if you look around the world, right, like,
there's no perfect place. Like, America on paper is the place. And that's why that's another thing. You don't see millions of refugees fleeing the United States, right? Even in the worst of times, people flee their countries to come here. And so it is a little bit ridiculous of me to talk about like leaving the US, but I'm a little bit worried. And so I think,
what would drive you leaving? Would it be a safety thing, or is it more of just like a headache thing where it's regulation or taxes or something like that?
Taxes are, people don't talk about the tax situation, but the US is effectively the only country in the world where you're taxed on worldwide income. And so you don't see a lot of Americans living in Singapore or Dubai for the tax benefits because they still pay US taxes, right? But you see lots of like other nationalities living in these countries. And so that's a real pain in the butt, but I don't see myself like giving up U.S. citizenship. Like, I don't mind paying taxes, but that is an issue that you cannot get away from that. But I just think ultimately I would just want to be somewhere safe and civilized that, like, I could, raise a family. And that's there's lots of places for that.
Yeah, I generally think of it as like there's an overlap between a place that is fairly safe, mostly common sense, regulation, government, etc., and also a place where they just leave you alone. Right.
See, I think Mexico is right for you, though. Like, it's not safe, but you can make it safe with your own paramilitary organization. I seriously think I see you as a warlord in Mexico, like, doing quite well for yourself. So.
Yeah, I want nothing to do with that. Literally nothing to do with that. What types of things in crypto are you guys excited about that either you're looking for companies in the space or you guys have recently invested in that you think is exciting?
Love Bitcoin. I'll tell you that. It's so funny. Everybody assumes I'm a big XRP shill, and we love Ripple, and we love what XRP is doing. But we own vastly more Bitcoin than any other asset, and we always have in our fund. Bitcoin is the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end, and there's lots of other interesting things happening, but they haven't proven themselves yet. So layer one tokens are not hot right now. We've invested in a bunch of them. Algorand is one we still have high hopes for, as well as lots of others. But, everybody's right now is focused on DeFi. And I think DeFi is interesting, but it has a lot of flaws. And a lot of people are very nervous about putting any real money into DeFi because it just isn't secure. It's not stable. Like, it needs to mature. Also, the rates, the sort of margin farming going on right now is outlandish and is not sustainable. And so we're very gun shy around getting involved in that kind of fad as well. But there are coins out there that really do really serve a purpose. And I still think there's a lot of innovation happening around that. An example is in Korea, we invested in Terra. Now, we invested in Terra in 2018. I don't know if you know them, but they're a stable coin in Korea, and they're expanding to other countries that's used for e-commerce. And so if you go to an e-commerce site in Korea and you pay with their stable coin, you actually end up getting like a 5 or 10% discount. And stable coins that don't have to be 100% backed by currency, they do in the US. You have to have a dollar for every dollar stable coin issued, but in other countries that isn't necessarily the case. So you get seigniorage and you get growth in the rate. The bigger your economy of usage of this coin goes, the more seigniorage or inflation you get. They can actually use some of that inflation to pay back the e-commerce sites. So the e-commerce sites get paid 1-to-1. And so it's this virtuous cycle. More and more people use Terra in Korea to pay for stuff because of the discount. And then it creates a bigger economy, which gives more money for them to give back to e-commerce sites. It's a beautiful system, and it's worked out really well. And that's an example of just a wonderful invention of a coin that can work anywhere in the world that doesn't require 1-to-1 backing of the stable coin. And so we see stuff like that, and the venture capitalist to me comes out. You asked me earlier about the do we do venture or do we do trading? I didn't really answer, but I'm a venture capitalist, and so I like doing venture deals. I like groups of people, entrepreneurs, starting companies, going from 0 to 1. I like investing in that, the long shot, where 1 in 10 pays off. But half of our team is purely trading, and they trade every day, and they do a really good job. They do exotic derivative stuff. They're buying, they're selling, they're shorting, they're longing. It's just I understand more of what they do than I let on, but I mean, right now I'm not that ignorant of it. But they are experts, and I let them run, and they've outperformed Bitcoin by 30% last year. And that was fantastic. And Bitcoin had a good year. So we do a little bit of both, but my heart is always in the venture, to do startups and the entrepreneurs starting something new. That's what I love.
Yeah. And it feels to me like there's the combination of those two things, right? So you're one of the only funds I know that kind of says, look, we're going to almost be 50-50. We're going to do a bunch of trading and look at the liquid stuff, but we're also going to do
There are other funds. There are other funds.
There's other ones that do it, but the ones that I've seen, and maybe I just haven't seen others like you, but a lot of them have a hedge fund or a liquid fund, and then they'll do a sidecar, or they'll somehow carve out into a separate fund, the illiquid stuff. Yeah. But it sounds like you guys are doing everything all in one fund.
We're doing those two things. There's some stuff we don't do, but those are the two things we do, and I think that it's good for us right now. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing you talked about was DeFi, and the one thing for me is I was telling one of my partners that it feels like people are building technology; they're not yet building products there. right? It's a lot of things that it works. And like, if you're somewhat technical or you've got a lot of persistence and kind of self-motivation, you can figure it out. You can use it. To your point, people are a little scared about putting really big dollars at play there. But
Yeah.
if you compare it to a product like a BlockFi or a Robinhood or, these other fintech, like true products with slick UXs and things like that, it just feels like there's something very different there. Do you see the same thing, or are you a little bit more bullish on kind of the user experiences and product side of it?
Well, okay, I disagree somewhat. So first of all, there's people like Vinny Lingham. Have you ever had Vinny on your show? He's a
I have
guy
not, but I've talked to him before.
His company is Civic, and I don't think I'm saying something I shouldn't say. Like he has I might be. Vinny's working on some stuff that I think fixes a lot of the problems in DeFi. But I'll leave it at that in case I don't know what's been announced. And we're not investors in that. He's just a friend. I have no financial interest in what he's doing. I wish I did. But I think that decentralization has many, many problems. And I talk about our first closing of our fund our very first closing was $50 million in XRP. And it was like literally 2 seconds to confirm the transaction. And we paid tens of cents. I think it was 40 cents for the transaction. It blows Bitcoin out of the water, right? It blows anything in the world out of the water, other than maybe handing a bag of money to somebody. And you can't beat that with Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is decentralized, and there's reasons why all of the problems with Bitcoin are acceptable. And if you don't know what those reasons are, listen to your podcast or read the Bitcoin Standard, right? But the problems of DeFi, it is the decentralized products. There's so many points of failure and so many points of risk, and it's hard and it's messy, and it's too much friction, and so it keeps people away. Those problems can be fixed, and I think people like Vinny are doing it now. In the meantime, companies like BlockFi and other companies are doing amazing things, helping people. In the meantime might be 20 years, right? Get a lot of the same services in a much safer and easier and quicker way. And so we support both. Yeah. When it comes to actually moving our money, we use companies like BlockFi, because when you're moving tens of millions of dollars, you need to know exactly what's going to happen to that money. So
yeah, is it fair to say that DeFi, is there correlations or comparisons to like early internet where things were hard, they were slow, they were messy, all that kind of stuff, and then it got over time it got improved?
Yeah, well, it's like homebrew stuff, right? And it's fun to do, and it kind of works sometimes. And when it does work, you're happy. But you're dealing with money here, and I think people just want to make sure that they don't lose their money. And so, it is what it is. We're investing in these companies, but we are not margin farming. We're not getting in that. That could end badly. So.
Makes sense. Last question for you before I do the rapid fire at the end. Do you miss traditional venture investing?
I do, but I don't necessarily miss Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has become less interesting as a place over the last couple of years, and I think it'll cycle back, and I'll be right back there. But I don't miss the culture, because I think the culture has changed. But I do always love meeting entrepreneurs and helping them, and I'll always love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I asked 2 questions to end each episode. First is, what is the most important book you've ever read?
It's so funny. The Bitcoin Standard has been formative, and the author is such a dick, right? I mean, he's very intelligent, but I personally do not love him. But the Bitcoin Standard in my current sort of life right now and in crypto is a book that, I mean, you really need to read the Satoshi white paper. You need to read the Bitcoin Standard if you want to really understand at a basic level why Bitcoin is important. Longer term, I think Guns, Germs, and Steel. I don't know if you've ever read that, but that is a book that was formative to me in my younger years, and I often go back to it and how I think about the world and why things are the way they are, and I'd recommend everybody read that as well.
I actually have Guns, Germs, and Steel in my top 5. I always say Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Think and Grow Rich, Richest Man in Babylon, and then Guns, Germs, and Steel.
But you told me before we got on that White Fragility was the book you think impacted you the most.
Sold out on Amazon. I couldn't get my copy.
You It's funny. You say different things off air than I'm just kidding. Yeah.
I love it. Last question's more fun. Aliens, believer or non-believer?
I just read a book called The Last Human. I tweeted about it. I don't know where these books I read. I didn't just find it. Like somebody recommended it on Twitter or something, so I bought it. It was super good. And
The Last Human.
Yeah, and it's a combination of interesting theses. So one is there's a guy named Ramaz Nan. I'm actually looking at my bookshelf right now. He wrote a book called Nexus a few years ago, and it was a trilogy, and it was sort of popular. And it's a very good book, but it's about networked minds. And he was sort of the idea of using different technologies to actually network our minds in the way that I think we all understand what that means now. The Last Human is about networked minds, but it's also about aliens and what a galaxy might look for. And I love the book. Like I read a lot of nonfiction, but I reward myself often with a good fiction book. And the math says there are aliens out there, and if there aren't, it's it's probably a hell of a piece of evidence of the existence of God. But yeah, I think aliens. I mean, I hope in our lifetime we get to meet them, right? So
it would be kind of boring not to, right? Like you spend so much time with
people
thinking.
Cold and lonely universe. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. You could ask me one question to finish up. What's the one question that you have?
Do you secretly love XRP? Because again, in our private conversations, you talk about it very bullishly and how much you really have put most of your assets or intend to in it. And I'm just wondering, what your real view on XRP is. So.
Should have never asked you this question. Let you ask me this.
Well, look, you asked yesterday, you asked your audience on Twitter, what we're going to talk about. And a lot of the XRP guys came out and they said they really want to talk about it. And they know my opinion on it. I'm in love with XRP. And I think it serves a very useful and important purpose. I just want you on the record saying what you think about XRP.
So, I mean, Brad and I basically talked about it, but if you separate XRP and Ripple as a software company that wants to build better software for banks, no brainer, makes sense. Venture capital bet. I'm jealous I didn't invest in Ripple in the seed round and make a bunch of money with all the venture capitalists, right? So that makes a ton of sense. The Ripple XRP relationship, very weird to me. I've been on record a million times in saying I don't know what that relationship is or was or whatever. That's not my job. It is what it is. And we are here today. I think that XRP
oh my God, there's a lot of hedging and hemming and hawing.
No, hold on. XRP, well, because that, look, the XRP army, I nod my respect to them. They don't fuck around. So I'm not going to mince words. But no, I think that XRP as a part of the Ripple product, meaning they use it inside the product, I understand why they do that, and I see the advantages inside the Ripple ecosystem. What I don't understand, and I think where I choose to not engage on the XRP side, is I don't understand why people are buying it, speculating on future price movements. Right? To me, if Ripple is successful, that doesn't mean that XRP has to be successful. And I think
you're talking about Bitcoin now. You're talking about Bitcoin now when you said speculate.
No, of course. Listen,
I mean, look, none of us know, right? I mean, none of us know.
Absolutely. Listen, by the way, Bitcoin for sure, I've said a million times, it is the most binary thing you could find. It is either going to be worth, millions of dollars a coin, or it's going to be worth basically nothing.
What do you think could hurt Bitcoin the most? What could make it worth nothing?
Self-inflicted wound. There's some code that's pushed that somehow does something detrimental in a material way. I think that's the most likely thing.
So I disagree with that.
Why?
What if the U.S. government seriously declared it a national security threat and did everything they could to shut it down? They could clearly kill the fiat on-ramps and off-ramps, right?
I think that's the
biggest danger.
I think that China and Russia would love that. They want to get off the U.S. dollar so badly. And I think that what they would look at and say is, wait a second.
Interesting. So you think Bitcoin is so large now that the U.S. government cannot effectively take it down anymore? That's a really interesting thought.
Well, what I think they can do is I think that they can heavily discourage, if not cut off, the United States citizens from using it.
Sure.
Right? So they ban ownership, do all that kind of stuff. What I think, though, is on a global basis, Russia and China both have publicly stated many times that the U.S. dollar system is incredibly detrimental. It's expensive. It's costly to them, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then you look at places like, Venezuela, all these places that are sanctioned. They would love nothing more than the U.S. to openly say, we don't like something, and then they all run and go use it. And then they can basically have the U.S. system of the world, and then you have like the non-US system of the world. And I recently saw 2 data points that I thought were really interesting. I don't know how much volume's gone through either one of these, so take it for what it is. But in Venezuela, they are using BTC Pay Server, whatever it's called, to allow people to pay with Bitcoin for government services. So like you want your driver's license, normally you can go
I didn't know that.
It just came out. Marty Bennett is the one who highlighted this that I saw him talking about it. So he basically positioned it as like the Venezuelan government is acquiring Bitcoin. I don't know if there's enough, actual transactions to like make that case, but the fact that they're willing to understand that this is possible and they're willing to actually allow people to pay with Bitcoin to the government, like that's interesting. The second thing is, I know for a fact
the way you light up when you talk about Bitcoin, like your energy level just went through the roof. I love watching you talk about this. This is what you look for in entrepreneurs: is passion about whatever product they're interested in.
It's the only piece of technology that I've ever seen that has the addressable market of the world.
Everyone.
Yeah, like literally it will touch 7 billion people if it becomes like on the uppermost limit of what we think it can become. The other thing that I definitely think is more likely than not is that you, me, and everybody else is underestimating how big it can get. So if you think of, everyone always compares it to like, the $90 trillion monetary supply, whatever. Murad Mahabdev, he recorded an episode maybe a year and a half ago now. And he came in, he made an argument that Bitcoin's market cap is not comparable just to the global monetary supply at 90 trillion. He thought it was 150 trillion. And how he got there was a lot of the assets that you or I own, we own because we don't want to hold cash because of inflation. So we'll buy, a house, art, whatever all this stuff is.
Right. Sure.
And so instead, just like Uber was a market expanding piece of technology, and it wasn't just against taxis, it ended up like some people don't own cars. Same thing here, where now all of a sudden, maybe I don't put my wealth in store of value assets. I can actually put that in quote unquote currency because it's a deflationary type currency. So I think that's interesting. But the other point is there's a number of countries that are now putting national resources towards mining. And so nefarious actors like North Korea are rumored to be doing it, right? And that's how they're driving some revenue. But then if you look at places like, again, Iran, China, like these different countries, it's just you're getting to a point now where the world's never had something that is truly not manipulated and not controlled by anybody. And so I fear that the US, every time they've ever seen something like that, they just are like, nope, if you go like deep enough down the stack, like you can find the point of failure. But if there actually is something that has no point of failure in terms of control or ownership, the countries that embrace it first end up winning, right? It's the countries that fight it, like they get screwed, right? Because they end up being the ones without any.
So I think that some of the most interesting content we've had in the last hour plus is in the last few minutes of you talking about Bitcoin. Like I want more of that. Like I like that you interview people and you're a very good interviewer, and I've interviewed a lot of people, so I understand what it takes to do that. But you it's just fun listening to you talk about it. You're a true believer. I mean, you're like a Scientologist who you're Tom Cruise jumping up and down on the couch, and I mean that in a positive. I mean, it's funny, but I also mean it like fairly positively. Like it's you believe this crazy stuff, and I do too. But I will tell you this: I think that there are 3 interesting coin models out there. I think there's lots more, like the Terra one I talked about. But you've got Bitcoin, which is money. I think you and I agree on that, and a large part of your audience agrees on that. Ethereum is the worldwide computer, and it's definitely interesting. Now, Ether may or may not end up being that, or somebody else may be that, but I think that's an interesting model as well. The third one is, I don't want to call it a banker coin because the XRP army doesn't like that, but like what Ripple is doing can disrupt the banking system in a positive way. It can help them eventually move to a Bitcoin world, I think in a way that's like very important. And Bitcoin, in the Bitcoin scanner, you talk a lot about how you get around the issues of the how slow and expensive the Bitcoin network is. You do it through banks, like he envisions banks. Well, you're going to need, I mean, yes, you can have banks, but if they're issuing artificial like fiat, basically, like, fractional reserve type banking, you're kind of back in the old world. And so I really think XRP has a chance to become like that coin that people use to actually move the money around when they need to do stuff fast. You need it to be somewhat centralized. And the downside of that centralization, I think, is less than ultimately having very, very powerful banks control everything there is to know about, to control about Bitcoin in the end.
Do those two things get mashed together in the sense of, let's say the US issues a digital dollar, or like JPM coin comes out or whatever. Do you think that eats into the potential that XRP can have?
It definitely could. I mean, there's an argument that XRP competes with Tether more than Bitcoin, right? And so if you look at how it's being used now, it's these cross-border payments where there's a lot of pain involved, and it's really helped MoneyGram, with making these cross-border payments faster and cheaper. So I think there's a long-term play for XRP. We love it, especially at these prices. We look at the price of most coins and Bitcoin and Sats, right? We don't look at ETH as $230 or whatever it is right now. We look at how many Sats it is, and we do that the same with XRP. And XRP is, I haven't looked in the last couple hours, but it's hovering on 2,000 Sats. That's very, very cheap for XRP, and so we are more bullish on XRP than we otherwise would be, and we think over the long run it's part of the ecosystem. Just believe that. But yeah, you're a good sport about this, because most Bitcoin maximalists cannot stomach and even having a conversation beyond how great Bitcoin is. And I think that you are somebody that's helping bring this community together instead of helping rip it apart. And I think that you're an important asset because of that. So I'm glad you do what you do.
Yeah, listen, I appreciate it. I also appreciate you taking the time to do this. We'll have to do it again.
I've been begging to be on the show since I met you in 18. So you finally let me on. Natalia was on.
Listen,
everybody
I was scared.
On the show.
To be honest, I was scared that you were hanging out in Chaz, and I was never going to get you on. Like you were going to become the mayor of Chaz.
I did want to go. I could drive over there. I did want to go, but ultimately I was just a little bit afraid. Like I didn't know what happened.
If you go, you have to live stream it. You just have to walk around with your phone and just film.
I think it's over now. Isn't it over? I saw that they're like, I don't know either.
Yeah.
I hope it isn't.
It's a great marketing. It's a great marketing tool for maybe some rule of law.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for doing it. We'll do it again in the future.
All right.